All right, so we're gonna pick off where we left off from the last time. We had that storm come in with thunder and lightning, and we had to stop for safety. So to catch us back up, so we were cutting out this notch for the second level of our stairs. We had just finished cutting in a majority of the way, because remember, with the curved angle of the saw, we have to stop early, otherwise we'll cut everything off. So we've done that on both of the side panel boards for the upper box. So now we're just going to nick in just a little bit on this notch. Most of the remainder of what we're going to have to do is by hand to make sure that we get the notch where we want it. But we're going to start it with the saw because the saw edges give us a nice straight starting point to work with. So safety first, got my safety glasses on, I've got ear protection on, of course the gloves. Also as a note, even though we just took this into the shed for the storm, I did, when I bring it back out, I took these pieces off, double checked everything was tight, made sure these were back into good position. So every time you restart, you want to make sure you're doing your safety checks. All right. So we're going to go ahead and we're at the point where we're just going to start those little notches from a measurement standpoint. Okay. Now we'll plug in our machine and there we go. Saw blade is stopped and we've cut in, so we've got a nice straight angle here. So now we'll finish off our notches by coming through with the hand saw. Alright, so there we've now cut our notch. So just so from a perspective standpoint, you see what's going to happen here is this is going to be the plank level for where we lay our tread or the flat part of the stair that you would step on. So now with this notch cut in here, when we bring the stair in, it's going to set level and flush, and then we'll be able to secure it with a couple of screws. And that's how we're going to set the treads for our staircase. So you got to do this to the other one, and that part will be done. Okay, so then since these are framing pieces and they're not going to actually be exposed, I like to label which piece they are, so when I'm looking at reassembling, I know where these are supposed to go. So this is top side box, right? This will be top side box left. Okay, so on my sheet here, on my schematics, I've got the drawings of both the box, and I'm keeping track of what I have left to cut. So I've just been working through each of my cuts, my notches, and how the different pieces will go together. The last two things I have to cut is the oak kick plates and the oak tread boards. The standard width of them isn't what we're going to be using today, so I've got to do some long cuts on these. So I'm going to reposition to the ground just to make sure that I've got a stable base for my boards to cut through the saw. and can extend that a little bit further than we can up on this table. So I'll be back in just a few. All right, so we're getting finished up measuring for the 2 cuts we'll make on each of the kick plate boards. So we've just been lining up our T-square, measuring out 38 inches wide and cutting it there. And then along here we have a 6 3/8 inch that we're marking along here. Now I'm doing the second double check of my measurements and lines just to make sure we get them right. So then double check here. We're letting the tape go off the edge of the board to make sure it's lying flat. Double checking our 38-inch measurement. And then just kind of soliding up our guideline. Very, very faint line that we draw on the wood. So as we're running our line through the table saw, we just keep it in line with that, and we should have a nice straight cut at the end. So I've done that on both of these boards and did the double check on the measurements. All right. So another interesting point to note on here is the frame of our staircase is going to be pine, but for the kick plate and treads, we're going with an oak. It's a little bit prettier of a wood for the parts that are going to be exposed, as well as oak is a higher density wood. So it's going to have less give as people are putting their weight across the tread boards. And then we did these as oak as well, just so that they look consistent as we're going up. But it's important to note because it's going to take a little bit extra on the saw blade because it's going through a denser wood. All right, so we're getting the wood lined up to where we want to cut through. We're going to lock in our guide bar here to make sure that we're getting a nice straight cut. Okay. And then important to note, especially when you're getting to your exterior and your final pieces, make sure that you're accounting for the thickness of the blade in your positioning so that you make sure it goes through straight and where you want, and you don't end up with that 3/4 of an inch cut loss. You can know that how much you're going to lose by looking at the blade thickness. Usually it'll come on the package of the blade. If you don't have it, you can just do a quick measurement and look to line up against the outer edge of the piece you're going to keep. And for this one, we are ready to go. You're going to get plugged in. Got our safety equipment check before we flip this on, and away we go. So we can pull the power again for safety as we line up for our next cut. So this is going to be the more difficult cut because we're going to be going this entire length of the board. So we will be running for quite some time. In addition, what happens when you have the longer cuts, anytime you are just a little bit off, that's accentuated more in terms of lining up your boards. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure this one twice. So and what I mean by measure twice, I mean measuring the position of our guide bar across the table. Right? So we'll start by lining up our edge precisely where we need it on the board. on our guide bar here to make sure it stays aligned. Okay, so now we've clipped that in, so this should hold. Now, to make sure what we're going to measure the second time, since we already measured the wood twice, is we're going to be measuring the distance between the edge of our guide bar and the saw blade or the knife guard here. So we want to make sure that front to back, we're the same distance away on our guide bar, so we don't end up creating a little bit of a curve or an angle as we're getting into the later portion of our cut. Now we're looking at to the edge of the blade, to the guide bar. We're lining that up to our 6 3/8 mark. Okay, so looks like we were off by 1/16 of an inch here. So now I've got that measurement. I'm going to reclamp here. Make sure it stays right where I want it. Perfect. And then we're going to do the same thing. Remember, your blade here is going to line up right with the saw blade. So we can just pull our measurement out, set to the edge of the table, and then mark here. So, looking at our outer edge, of our line, and we are right at that 6 3/8 inch mark. So we are in, double check, I'm getting a shadow here actually, let me double check that edge. So it looks like we actually did shift just slightly off, probably only in the 1/16 of an inch or less mark. So we're just going to realign that back end. And we'll double check our measurements here again. Again, this level of measurement and accuracy is important in two areas. One, if you're doing construction that's going to involve people's weight on it and you're required to meet code, you're going to want to be very precise in your measurements. And then also, again, when you're doing those longer cuts. If you're doing a shorter cut, the slight amount of variance off from your measurement in terms of this guide bar is going to have a lower impact overall. But it's still important to make sure that you're keeping all those factors aligned as you're getting ready to make your cut. Because especially when you're working with oak, you're talking about a more expensive wood. So making a mistake and having to redo it can add dollars to your project that you probably want to avoid. All right, so now we've got our measured twice on our wood, measured twice on our blade distance. We double checked our blade alignment, top and bottom. Okay, safety check, ear protection in, eye protection on, hand protection on. So now we're ready to cut through this board. Okay. Double checking our alignment. And then the other detail is it's very easy to shift off of the board as you're placing it in. So when you're setting your guide position, you want to make sure that you're not pressing hard, but you're making sure that you're guiding it in straight so that you don't see edges of the board coming off your guide bar. So you're going to have to apply just a little bit of pressure as you're guiding it through the blade to make sure it stays here so your cut stays true. All right, so it looks like we're ready to go. So we're going to go ahead and plug in and make our cut. So there we go. And then to to check again before we actually use this, we check our measurement. Perfect, 6 3/8, 6 3/8, 6 3/8. So we got a really good cut on that one. So now we've got our next board to make our cuts on. All right, repeat it. I'll check back in with you as soon as I'm done with this one.